Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Tree School Online. I'm Julie Woodward with the Oregon Forest Resources Institute, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today's Tree School Online webinar. Tree School Online is a production of the OSU Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Program and the Partnership for Forestry Education. We want to give recognition to the Oregon Forest Resources Institute for contributing to this project and to the U.S. Forest Service and the Oregon Department of Forestry for providing a grant. Tree School Online webinars are offered every first and third Tuesday of the month through June of 2021. We're going to take the summer months off. Please visit the Tree School Online page on knowyourforest.org for updates and registration for upcoming webinars. Many of you have probably joined us before, so welcome back. And if you're new to the series, thanks for joining us today. You might find it useful to find your Zoom toolbar often at the very bottom or top. And some of those things you're going to want to access, especially if you want to ask questions, the Q&A button. Know that all the audio and video has been turned off for all the participants. It's just written questions in the Q&A box. And I'll be monitoring that throughout the webinar and ask those questions for you at the end of the session. We also have the chat box, and that's going to be generally if you have any comments or problems or things that you need addressed sooner. Norma Klein from OSU will be helping to watch over those chat. Resources can be found on the Tree School Online class guide page, which you can easily reach from the Tree School Online page. Once you're in the webinar description, you can click on resources, and we've put many resources in there for you related to this topic today. The webinars are being recorded and they'll be archived as a YouTube video, and you can go back and watch this again or share it with someone. It usually takes about a week for us to get those up. Polls will be used during this webinar, and polls should pop up on your screen in a box, and you can answer those questions. If you don't see it, you can click on the poll again on that Zoom toolbar, and it should pop up for you to answer those questions. We appreciate the feedback. The views and opinions expressed by our speakers are those and theirs alone, and not those of OSU, OFRE, and the Partnership for Forestry Education. And today I'm excited to bring you this presentation on the best practices of managing logging slash piles and burning, and we given by Mike Cafferata and Rodney Jacobs. And let me give you a little background on Mike. Is a Forest Grove District Forester for the Oregon Department of Forestry. As a forester, Mike has burned many slash piles from his family and state forest property, and he's had his own fire escapes and helped others have had this experience. As with all ODF staff, Mike is part of the complete and coordinated system for the fire suppression, and he serves as a division supervisor and an agency administrator locally and statewide. And Rodney currently lives in Banks, Oregon, has been working for Stimson Lumber for nearly 22 years and is the current president of the Northwest Oregon Forest Protective Association. During his time with Stimson, Rodney has been responsible for reforestation and harvesting activities throughout Washington, Clatsop, Tillamook, and the Columbia counties. Slash management is a large component of Stimson's land management policy, and Rodney spends a considerable amount of time each year managing slash, which begins prior to harvest, during the annual budgeting process, and continues through harvesting to slash piling and burning, and continues until all those piles are completely cool. Both of them bring a vast amount of experience and have been part of helping to develop the best management practices. And those practices will be discussed today and also available in a resource in a pamphlet called the Managing Logging Slash Piles in Northwest Oregon. So I'm excited to have Mike and Rodney with us today. And we're gonna kick off here with a little bit of a poll just to ask 3 questions. And you should see that come up. And the first one is, where are you from? And then about yourself. And then how many acres of forest land do you own or manage? So if you could answer those questions for us, we'll just take less than a minute here and start getting an idea of where people are joining us from today. And we appreciate everyone that's joining us. We know it's a sunny May afternoon. It's always hard to come in and get on the webinars as we get further into this pretty season. We have, it looks like over 70 people joining us today. We had over 100 registered. We know this is an important topic And we appreciate everybody's interest in coming in and learning about this. And so where are you from? We're going to go ahead and end the polling, and we'll take a look at those results. It looks like we're again kind of across the board, but pretty heavy here in the Willamette Valley area. Some in the coastal, Southwest, Central, or Eastern Oregon, Washington State, US, and we have either for fun or for truth, we have a couple outside the USA. So you guys are going international today. No pressure. And then about yourself, we have a good amount of woodland owners joining us and different professionals from different entities. And then we have also across the board from people that don't own that forest land, but then all the way up to over 1,000 acres. So thanks for sharing those. And we appreciate hearing a little bit about where the audience is from, since we can't see you today. So appreciate everybody joining us. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Mike and Rodney, and we will look forward to hearing more about what you guys can share about best practices of managing logging slash piles and burning.
Okay, well, gosh, it's good to have everybody here, and it is strange not be able to see people, see your faces, but I do encourage you to send your questions to Julie, and Julie will feed them to us, and we'll either answer them as they come in or at the end, I'm sure. And so the basics of this presentation really come from, can you take the poll down there, Julie, or is that something that would come down out of the middle of the screen? So there we go. Okay, so our Northwest Forest Protective Association, works across Northwest Oregon, basically from McMinnville north of the Columbia River and from Forest Grove to the coast. And Rodney's the president of it. We work together on, really all things related to fire protection, from education and enforcement to wildfire suppression. And we had a tour a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, Rodney. And anyway, one of the outcomes is that there's a lot of different people working with slash, small landowners, large landowners, operators of various different experience levels. And we decided that it'd be helpful to the community if we put together some of those things that as a community we knew, but they weren't shared that widely. And this publication captures those. And so this is available. First of all, you should be able to walk into the Oregon Department of Forestry office in Forest Grove or Astoria or Tillamook and pick one up. You can ask your Stewardship Forester Forum. I know that Banks Fire has some their new nice station there in Buxton. And so if you want to see some of this and be able to read about it and look at the pictures, it's in this publication right here. And obviously available from the OregonForest.org website and OFRI with many of the other good publications they have. So. Okay, go ahead, Julie. Okay, and so here's a picture of this tour that we had. Of course, it was cold and wet. We ended up in the Banks Fire Station to talk about burning slash. But you also see the collaboration there, that some of the expertise that we gathered, first of all, the landowners and the Protective Association, Stimson being a part of that, and also the other large landowners reviewing that and providing their expertise. Some of my staff, the Oregon Department of Forestry, Oregon State University and the Extension Service there, with Carrie, and Oregon Forest Resources Institute, Associated Oregon Loggers Keep Oregon Green. So they all provided review and insight and help in their own ways, and really appreciate that collaboration. Go ahead, Julie. Okay, so, but our goal here is to share best management practices for burning. And I think this picture is an example of why we think this is important. And so this is a slash pile that is along a public road here in Washington County. I think it has a burn spot on the backside of it there that actually doesn't show in the picture. Of course, the pile didn't burn. It is providing some wildlife habitat, so that's probably a good thing. But also, if the landowner's intent was to get it burned and remove that public hazard, that's pretty difficult to do. So you can see there's large logs in there. There's a very large amount of dirt and very difficult to burn. And so really what we wanted to do here is provide a tool to improve the burning practices. And that comes with preventing problems associated with burning. Smoke, for example, we try real hard to manage smoke to maintain clean air. Wildfire, we've had many escapes from these piles, and of course, all the many problems that come with that of resource damage and costs. And I would say also, the large wood that is hard to burn and provides problems can provide benefits to meet other goals that many landowners have. So that's our real goal for the day, I think, is to help this community that we're talking to today and everybody else in the Northwest, if you are going to burn, to do that more efficiently and more effectively by sharing these best management practices. Rodney, anything to add to that?
No, Mike, you're doing good.
Okay. So Rodney and I are going to split this presentation up. We have, I don't know, we have maybe 20, 25 slides somewhere in that area, and we've split that up and we'll kind of share expertise and back and forth. So, okay, this next one is mine. And, this really, as Rodney kind of mentioned at the beginning, the first thing that I think everybody needs to do is recognize that your discussion about burning really needs to start before you harvest. And there's some real good reasons for that. What are your options? And the other one is, what is your goals? And I say, what are your options? Because in Oregon, and I'm sure probably in Washington and internationally as well, but certainly in Oregon, where your property is makes a very important difference in what your options are. So just here speaking about the Forest Grove area directly, if you're inside the Oregon Department of Forestry protection boundary, then you can burn your slash under our guidelines. But if you're outside of our boundary, then you have to work with your local fire department and with the Department of Environmental Quality, kind of depending on where your property is, you may not be able to burn it at all. In which case, you need to know that before you harvest, so that if you want to leave it scattered so you can plant through it, or if you're going to remove it off site. But what you don't want to do is build large slash piles that you can't burn, and then you probably have an unsightly hazard right there on your property, and you really have very few options. So when I say, what are your options, what that really boils down to is what do the regulations allow? And those regulations are around air quality and probably also around fire safety, but largely around air quality. And the second thing, what are your goals? If depending on what your management objectives are, you may want to burn it for access for seedlings. You may want to burn it to lower your fire hazard on the site. You may want to keep it for nutrient cycling and for wildlife habitat, or some combination. But you need to think about that ahead of time. And then when I say shared expectations and no surprises, for the person you're working with, the logger, that anytime you want to move slash, that's expensive. And so if you wait till the very last minute and then ask them to do something that they can't afford, then you may not be very successful. So it's really best to have shared expectations ahead of time and no surprises. Now, is burning an option? I wish there was a one size fits all answer to that. And there absolutely isn't. And so one way you can figure that out is call your local Department of Forestry office and just talk it over with them. They should know, but there really is no one size fits all. So it's just very complicated. Okay, so your options, prepared for burning, that's really what we're going to talk about today. Then you can leave it for wildlife and nutrient cycling. And so we've done some of that with the Department of Forestry. Either scattered out or we're piling it up for wildlife in certain locations and in certain configurations. And then also we separate a lot of pieces out for firewood. And there's, obviously a lot of value in that. So, but today we're really going to talk about how to prepare and how to burn that material.
And Mike, I'll add a point here. So part of the pre-harvest is when you meet with the logger, you're going to create a contract and you're going to you're going to create a deal to merchandise the wood. Every tree is going to produce a certain amount of pulp, that top 20, 30 feet. Really, it's that top 20, 30 feet that if they can get rid of that, send it to the pulp mill, that's going to reduce the biomass, the fuel loading on your property. And the more of that you can get shipped off, the better off you're going to be, the less you're going to have to burn. And it's this larger woody material that tends to linger. It's harder to pile. It just kind of makes a mess of the area. And it's something that a lot of loggers don't want to take off because, it's 25% of the value of a saw log. So it doesn't pay to get rid of it. But, they're getting paid good money to log it, haul it away, or the saw logs, they should also deal with the pulp or make that part of the contract.
Hey, Rodney, it looks like we might have lost Mike Cafferata.
Oh, okay.
I think his computer was giving him problems. So
Okay,
you might
perfect.
want to pick it up from here and hopefully he
Sure.
can join us again.
All right. Thanks for letting me know that. Okay. So, how are we going to deal with large pieces of material? Here's a picture of, kind of example what we're looking at. There's a large woody material that, the Forest Practice Act requires to be left, a certain volume out there scattered throughout the harvest unit. So you can scatter it for animals. They'll use it how they choose. If it's convenient, you can leave it stacked next to the road, let people come cut it. You cut it yourself. You can also manipulate it into a bioden, make habitat for any sort of, rabbits, porcupines, those type of four-legged creatures. Sometimes, that's not silviculturally, that's not something we're always looking for, because sometimes those animals tend to eat our trees, so we don't encourage it. But people have different goals for their land, and making the slash into a habitat is an effective way to do it. So the issue with the large woody debris is, if we were to get this pile to go, the large pieces tend to burn, a long time, a couple 3 days at least. And it's hard for us to control the weather or predict the weather, what it's going to do 3 or 4 days after lighting. As those embers just sit there and smolder, it's very difficult to take care of it. Okay, next slide.
Hi, Rodney. I think I'm back now.
All right, Mike. So go ahead. I spoke a little bit about this slide already. I hit the high points, I believe. If you have anything particular, we can move on, or
Rodney.
You can address it.
Yeah, the picture is what we did at one of our landings with the road building debris. So I think there was a question in the chat there about stumps. And like Rodney said, very hard to burn. They're going to burn for a long time. What we've done with them here is piled them in a pile and then put some light slash over the top. And the idea being there's a lot of dens and wildlife habitat, and really not much of a fire hazard, because it's be kind of hard to burn that pile because it's not got many fines in it, and hopefully a benefit to wildlife habitat in the long term. So that's what that picture is right there. I still don't recommend doing that where you have high public use, because people will put up targets on it, or there'll be an attractive nuisance. But in many locations, I think that's a great thing to do with stumps and large logs. Thanks, Rodney.
You bet.
Yeah, the main lesson is don't burn those large pieces. And, some people say anything larger than 8 or 10 inches, you can leave that on the, on the ground somewhere, and it's better than burning it up. So your pile is really smaller material. Okay, I think, Rodney, I can't remember if this is mine or yours.
Well, I have a star by it, so I think it's mine.
Okay.
All right, so constructing piles, a couple things you want to do first is, just the way the logging happens, the slash itself is going to concentrate in certain areas where they process and load the logs. So that's kind of a little bit, it's going to dictate where the slash loading will be. You can work with the logger to say, hey, don't load here in the draw load up here and where it's going to be drier. You can kind of manipulate that a little bit, but it takes a lot of diesel to move slice around. So really, I've always thought if the slice loading is there, add to it. It doesn't, it's kind of hard. It's very difficult to move slice. So some things you want to be aware when you're building your piles is where's the leaf trees, your adjacent standing timber, reprod, anything like that. You know, our piles are going to burn very hot, you know, flame lengths, you know, 30, 40 feet, maybe depending on the wind and the weather you're going to be burning in. And when those flame lengths tip over, you know, I've killed a lot of trees 400 feet away from a pile because of big storm events. So, you know, really that particular, you know, event was out of the ordinary. But typically we'll tell our slash piler, you know, 50 feet away from property lines, protected resources, like I said, standing timber, leaf trees, reprod, things of that nature. Then you also want to be concerned about your neighbors, whether it be other industrial landowners, homes, property lines, things of that nature. Obviously, with the homes, you don't want to smoke the neighbor out. So you will want to be, you know, real cautious, you know, try and avoid building a pile near a house. You know, if you light the pile, you're liable for what happens. I'd hate to have an ember land on my neighbor's cedar shake roof, you know, start a fire over there. Likewise, I'd hate to light a landing pile and have it creep over into my neighbor's forest land, burn up some of their prized possession. So be aware where your piles are at. The other thing is look for power lines. Obviously, when we burn up piles, you know, power poles have all that creosote, which itself wants to burn. So you don't want to light those on fire. Also, for a safety aspect, a real thick, dense column of smoke can conduct electricity. So if you're burning underneath, you know, transmission lines that might be, you know, 50 feet in the air with metal poles, you might think, hey, this is safe. I'm not going to burn the poles up. Sure, but you could electrocute yourself. You know, that might be that's a risk. Next thing is road access. And this is important for lighting the piles. You know, at some point you have to go get fuel to that pile and light it. So you see in this particular picture, I'm not sure the distance, but you see a pile that was not burned off in the distance. You know, it's kind of hard to tell why that wasn't burned, but it could just be, it took a lot of effort to get over there. Also, when you start getting further away from the roads, it's more difficult to patrol the pile. You know, we're gonna be watching these piles smolder for, you know, 4 or 6 weeks maybe. And if they're 300, 400, 500 feet off the road, it's hard to see that little column of smoke that's going to indicate that it still has some heat. And then if you do get in a situation where the east wind picks up, lights that pile on fire, you have to go out there and mop it up. And if it's 600 feet away from the road, that takes a lot of hose, a lot of effort. So, you know, as a rule of thumb, we'd like to keep our burning next to the roads as close as possible to the roads, unless there's a big silviculture or fire risk that's going to justify going a little further away. Other spots to avoid, we've talked a lot about building piles on top of old growth stumps, things of that nature. It's great to, you know, it's an unplantable spot, so it's really tempting to put slash on top of there. Like Mike's alluded to, those retain heat, can burn a long time. Depressions and riparian areas, they will hold the humidity, and your pile will has a higher moisture content. It'll never dry out. You'll have a hard time lighting it, unless it's the best perfect day. Steep slopes are problematic just because as the pile burns, large woody debris is going to break free and roll down the hill. And once it does that, you can't really control what it's going to do. Okay, next slide, please.
Yeah, hey, Rodney, this just one more moment on this picture. This is a spot where a person burned these piles in the spring in June, and you can see that old growth stump that all the stuff was piled on, and it did hold heat, and not this pile, but several of the other piles in the unit, when the weather turned, did spread and cause the fire department and us to respond and have to put the fire out. So that's an example of where piling it on a large stump and the other one as well caused some of that, some of the problems for them. So just to illustrate. Thanks.
Yep, you bet. Okay, so this is a good example of a pile that, you know, for whatever reason, didn't fully consume. And these are the piles that are can be problematic for us. You know, this pile here has a lot of large woody debris. Half the pile burned. So, you know, I'm going to guess the part that in the foreground there that burned was probably had some finer fuels, maybe more Doug fir, cedar, stuff that wants to burn nicer. Maybe that stuff is hardwoods in the back, just less fines. So what happens is it's still fuel. And as the weather changes, you have the embers there in the bottom, the ash, those are still hot. And those will, you know, keep drying that, the larger material that didn't burn, it'll keep drying that. And at one point with the east wind event, that stuff could light. And then you have a fuel source and it's problematic. So with this particular pile, you know, it's maybe had too many, not enough fines to get the bigger stuff to go. It could have had a large wind event that blew all the heat, you know, kind of sideways against it. So it wasn't able to carry the fire through that pile. And it could have had a lot of dirt in it. Dirt acts as a good insulator, protects the wood from burning. So there's a lot of reasons why this pile may not have burned, but it's what we want to avoid. Okay, tips for better burning. Okay, so you want to start with good burnable material. Just like, you know, imagine your pile is a campfire. You always, you know, start with kindling. You know, obviously we're on a larger scale, but still you have to get the pile going. So look for the smaller material, a lot of fines on it, a lot of needles. Dry needles are really good. So let's maintain access to ignition area. We'll talk a little bit later about constructing the pile, but as you construct the pile, you're going to create a place to light the pile, to light it. And you just want to maintain access to it. If possible, put your good burnable material on the bottom of the pile, and then put your vine maple, other hardwood type species on top. If you can, create a ring of mineral soil around the pile, and that's going to keep the pile from creeping and creating issues that way, fire spread. And then also you want to allow the pile to season. Green piles are very difficult to burn, and piles that are created during a rain event, you know, so are also difficult to burn. If you pile it dry, the pile will stay dry. If you pile it wet, it'll stay wet. And a clean pile or a clean dry pile is going to emit less smoke. So if you're worried about smoke management, you have those concerns or neighbors, you want the pile to burn hot and clean. Okay, this is an example of, you know, a pretty perfect pile. If you look at it, there's very few large woody pieces out there. The pieces you do see out there, I'm going to guess might be 3 or 4 inches diameter. The pile has a lot of brown needles that just, you know, look real inviting to burn. The one thing I'd say, you know, we did mention about creating the ring of mineral soil around the pile. This doesn't have it, but the amount of material on the ground isn't really that conducive to creating a fire spread. So this is a kind of a textbook pile. It can't always happen, but this might be a good goal.
This one, Rodney, is not a landing pile. So I think there's sort of almost 2 categories of piling, but if you're doing in-unit piling for reforestation and slash abatement, I'm with you 100%. And then landing pile is a little bit different animal. We'll see those later too.
Exactly. Okay, so using plastic. This has been kind of a paradigm shift within the industry. It wasn't too many years ago, we weren't necessarily allowed to use plastic, and now we're very much encouraged to use plastic. And basically what we're doing is creating a 10 by 10 or whatever size piece you really want and putting it somewhere in that pile to create a good dry lighting spot. Also, what using plastic does is prolongs your burning window. As a rule of thumb, Stimson will burn from October 15th to, or let's say Halloween to Thanksgiving will be our typical burn window. Obviously, as you get closer to Thanksgiving, we've received, 20 inches of rain by then, maybe. Things are getting pretty wet. So by having a good, clean, dry spot that you have access to, allows you to burn those piles into that 3rd, 4th week of November. Okay, so we're so you can put the plastic during the construction of the pile. And so basically what you do is if a machine out there is piling, you'll build 6 to 8 feet tall. This is maintaining your access. Put a piece of plastic on top, and then have the machine put more slash on top of it. If you don't have access to a machine to do that, you can definitely do it afterwards. And we'll have a picture of that coming up. Basically just gonna drag the piece of plastic over the top and cover as much of the pile as you can. Being careful, just climbing on top of the pile. You need to be careful with that.
Rodney, I think this is one of the places that small landowners, that shared expectations ahead of the burn. But if you're only going to burn the landings, it is something you can ask the logger to do, is to put plastic in the pile when they're making it. So they may not be used to doing that, and they may you may have to talk to them about it a little bit or show them that pamphlet that we have. But I think getting 6 or 8 feet, and when the pile is that big, taking the time to put a 10 by 15 piece of plastic in it really will save you a lot of headaches down the road. And I think it does a better job than when you put it on top at the end, especially if it's going to be a little while before you burn your pile. Anytime you put it on top, you try and weigh it down with sticks and logs, and you tie the corners, that works. But as the wind works on it, and if it sits for several months, it gets tears in it. And so I think if you can pull it off and have the plastic put in there while they're building the pile, you'll really appreciate that later on. So
yes. Okay, here's a couple pictures of the process of putting plastic in your piles. The picture on your left is one of our slash pilers. He's out there piling the unit, obviously. You can see there, he built the pile, let's just say it's 8 feet tall. You can see the plastic is spread out over the top. And then then he's just gonna keep adding plastic to that. And biggest thing is keeping a vertical side that's gonna give you access to that dry spot. On the right is a picture of showing the corner how we tie plastic down. Once you get the plastic over the top, it's kind of hard to see, but in the corner, there's a little rock. You wrap the plastic around the rock, and then that gives the rope something to tie onto, and it stays pretty snug. Like Mike was saying, you want to keep it from blowing away. So take other larger pieces, try and throw over, and keep that from flapping in the wind. So we have a question here. Do you burn the plastic layers when you burn the pile? The plastic does burn. It could be, if you don't want to burn it and it's on top, like this picture shows, you could go out there, cut the ropes, and pull the plastic off. That's definitely a possibility if you don't want to do that.
There's, as Rodney spoke about before, it used to be that plastic was frowned upon because of the emissions that it would provide. But I think the research now has shown that the overall emissions are greatly reduced by having a good dry spot to get some heat going. And so the emissions from the plastic are inconsequential to the savings in emissions if you have a dry spot. So nowadays we think it's fine to leave the plastic on there. And it used to be 10 by 10 was maybe the maximum size. And now we say more plastic is better. If you have a drier pile, it really cuts down on emissions. So.
Okay, next. So the next question is how high can you build it? Really, if the machine, to the height of the machine is its limits. At some point, if you make it too much of a haystack, it's going to just fall over, and that doesn't do any good. And like I mentioned before, every time that machine is grabbing slash and carrying it to the top of the pile, that's just using diesel. It's costing money. So once you get above, you put that 6 to 8 feet, put the plastic in, get another 3-4 feet on top. That's really all the higher you need to be. Then you can start going wider, just increasing the diameter of the pile. Hope that answers that question. Okay, so equipment for building the piles. Obviously, you can go out there and build it yourself, but that's rather difficult to do. Log loaders are very effective at building piles, but they have their limitations. If you're familiar with the log loader, the tongs are rather floppy, so it's hard to reach down into the ground and pick up smaller pieces. If the pieces are embedded in the ground or amongst other slash, it can be hard to pick them out. But with all those, a good operator can make a very good pile. Excavator with brush rake, that's the one picture you saw before of the orange machine. That brush rake is just it's a 5 or 6 foot wide rake with a thumb as well, that he goes around and just literally rakes up the slash. It's a very effective tool. He can get away from the stumps, pick up slash. It's very, very, very effective. Negative with that machine is it's really just good for plowing slash. So our operator, he uses that machine maybe 8-9 months a year, and then he's done. He could get a different bucket, do other dirt work, but when he's off work, not plowing, it's also not really time to be digging, doing other dirt work. So it's kind of very much a user, single-use machine. Bulldozers, you really need to have a high track D8, D7, something pretty large with a brush rake. You can't use a flat blade because that's going to move too much soil. You also have stumps out there. To really make a dozers, they can be fast and efficient. The D8 is huge. It can go through and just pull up stumps or push up stumps, and it just goes. It creates its own path. If you're trying to use a D5, D6, a lot of times they're too small. They can't move that stump. They have to go around it, and that can be pretty tough. All those little change of directions, trying to manipulate their way around the unit, tends to compact the soil more. So bulldozers aren't really that common anymore for building piles. They're pretty good. Also, you can't get the height of them. A D8 could make maybe an 8-foot pile just as it starts, accumulates all the slash, starts pushing it. It just kind of rolls over and creates a windrow. But usually it's about 8 feet high, and that's not really tall. So,
Rodney, it's been my observation that every logger has a way to create slash piles, and it feels like mostly they use log loaders. So they've got those little tongs, and they're trying to do, like you said, is pick up what they can. But sometimes they use, maybe you showed me this, Rodney, or somebody did, where they had a bulldozer blade and used the log loader to take the the brush rake and use that to scrape slash into a pile. We're able to do that pretty effectively.
Right.
But what I say about all that is that's really why communicating ahead of time is, what do you need to have? And if this is a place you want to take your family for a picnic as a small landowner and you want it to be really nice, then you need to be able to talk about that ahead of time, because a log loader won't be able to do that. It's going to leave all the bark. It's going to leave a lot of chunks, or they're going to spend an awful lot of time. And so if you really need that, then make sure you talk about that ahead of time so they can be sure to have the right equipment to accomplish what you're looking for.
Okay, here's a couple of pictures of, well, the one on the left is the brush rake on an excavator. You see the tines there for the rake and the thumb. The other thing good about these tines is he can, if you have a compacted area, just, you're landing where the processor sat there, just ground that the bark, other debris into the ground. Those tines are really effective at scratching that up, breaking up the soil. If you have a temporary dirt road out there, those tines are great for just kind of cleaning up after the loggers, what the loggers aren't able to do. Great option. The picture on the right, that's a processing head. So definitely not what you want to use. It's less efficient than log loaders, but as that picture shows, he has two chunks there that he can pick up and move. As long as you have some hydraulics that open and close, can pinch, you can make a pile.
And this guy on the right was piling with that, but really it's only really good for moving around large stuff. And so very inefficient. Okay, so in this process of burning, in your effort to prepare to burn, one thing to think about is you do have to notify the Oregon Department of Forestry if it's in our jurisdiction. So hopefully before you've started this process, you know whose jurisdiction you're in. And if you're in the Oregon Department of Forestry one, then it does take notification to the Department of Forestry. And then they'll help you walk you through that system. But it's kind of a three-part system. You have to register it, you have to have a burn plan, and then you have to have a burn permit, and then you actually burn. So really this is a several week process at a minimum. And so that's something to think about ahead of time. Make sure you have it in place. If it's your local fire department, then, or DEQ, then that's a different process. And so you'll need to work with them. But the real lesson here is it takes time. You have to think ahead and know who you're working with and make sure you follow their process. Okay, Rodney, we'll probably split this one up into each provide some thoughts on it. But so weather obviously is super important, and you've probably done everything right. You've worked with your logger ahead of time to build the right kind of piles in the right locations. You've worked with the Department of Forestry to notify us of a burn that you'd like to do. You've registered this with us. So you've told us where it is and what's there and what your goals are. But as you get closer, you have to start watching the weather to decide when to burn. And we'll give you advice on that. And there's certain times when we'll say you can't burn. But once we get into the window when it's not a fire hazard, then it's more on the landowner to decide when the time is right for you. And that really varies a lot. If you have one pile and you live right there, you might have one set of tolerances. And if you have many piles and they're hard to monitor because they're a long ways away, then you might be different in your tolerance. And so the weather is, it varies. Some of the places to go for information, if you go to Oregon Department of Forestry website, they're under the fire protection, there's a burning link. And there's some really excellent weather resources there that you can access. There's the National Weather Service, and that's really what I use mostly, is look at the National Weather Service for their forecast. And so that's probably the the prime one that I look at. Rodney, you want to talk about the node forecast? I know it's one of your favorites, and I think it's a good one too.
Yeah, so there'll be I think the next, do we have another picture of it on the next slide, I think?
Maybe we could bounce back and forth a little bit here, Julie.
Yeah, if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about it. So the node, it stands for Northwest Oregon Dry Easterlies. So, for just in Northwest Oregon here, we get east winds that come out of the gorge and go all the way over to Seaside, Astoria, Tillamook. And so this weather predictive service here, I'm not sure who does it, Mike. I guess ODF does it. But you can see there's a numeric scale down at the bottom. And what this will do is give you a four-day forecast of what the dry easterly winds will be doing. And, it's pretty darn accurate. And so for us, we'll start looking at that. And if we start seeing yellows, actually blues and yellows popping up, we really start questioning, should we be burning? It could still be 3 days out, but we're questioning, should we be burning? What's on the backside of that dry event? If there's no rain in the future, we are really, we really constraining what we burn, making sure it's areas that we can patrol really easy, areas that, maybe we can't burn otherwise. Here, we're located pretty close to Forest Grove. Just to the east of us is a SSRA. So we cannot get smoke over into Forest Grove. So we have to burn on an east wind day. So we'll look at this, and this will tell us when east winds are coming, and we'll kind of gamble. The one in the middle is from an app called windy.com. And what this does, it does a very good job at predicting, 14 days out, what the wind is going to do. You see all the, here, this screenshot shows you it's a northwest wind at 5 miles an hour. You hit play, it'll just keep on playing, and you'll see the wind vectors changing, lengths, directions. It's a good source. And then all the way to the right is a NOAA forecast. This will give you a 10-day. And the column on the left gives you a cumulative 24-hour precipitation. And it's colored, the darker green. It'll go from green to yellow to red, depending on the intensity of the rainfall. And so we'll start looking at that to look, okay, we're going to burn. And in the next 3 days, we're going to get, we can look at it and say, okay, we're going to get 2 inches of rain. We should be pretty safe. But if we look at it, today, but next, it's okay to burn today. We have 2 inches, but then we have a 9 days of dry weather. You kind of have to think, do I want to burn on this storm event, because it's going to turn around dry right after that. And really, it takes our piles will burn hot for 1 day and then linger for 3-4 days. So like I said, we're looking at for the long run here.
Maybe step back there, Julie, that previous slide. We'll just bounce back and forth a little bit. So I want to just mention the Rufus Weather Cafe. I look at that pretty often, and this is a weather forecaster really around, I think he started around agricultural issues, but looks at longer term forecasts. So he's not trying to do day-to-day weather forecasting. He's looking a week out or 2 weeks out. And kind of like Rodney said, my advice, burning, that you're looking at that 7, 8, 9, 10-day forecast. And if you have those dry easterlies, you have an east wind event, that's you probably don't want to burn. Or, if you only have one pile and it's easy to monitor, maybe you can burn it with that in the forecast. But you need to be aware that when that dry weather hits and that dry wind picks up, if you have heat left in your pile, you're going to have to deal with that. That very likely it'll cause it to rekindle if there's anything left to burn and spark to that new spot. So that's what I would say around the weather is you have to be really thoughtful and careful and recognize if it's going to get turned dry and windy that you're going to have to deal with the pile. I like fall burning. Some people do burn in the spring, but the spring burning, there's just your material is too wet. And so oftentimes you won't get complete consumption, and then you'll get residual heat in the bottom of the pile with a dry ring around it. And as the summer comes on, everything dries out. And if you haven't done a good job of checking, you'll get trouble as it rekindles in the summertime. Every year we get a few of those here in Northwest. So. Go ahead, Julie, thanks.
I think we can go forward 2 slides here.
Yeah, so you're probably asking yourself, what is ideal, right? And it's almost impossible. And furthermore, the Department of Forestry and the smoke management trying to keep smoke out of the smoke sensitive receptor areas, SSRAs, we're telling you can't burn even though the weather's perfect, but it would pull the smoke into town. And so it can be a real challenge depending on where you're located. But I think of the ideal day as being one of those late fall or winter days when the exposed fuels are damp, everything around your pile is damp, the pile is still dry enough to burn, and the 10-day forecast doesn't have an east wind event in it. And so, that's when I'm burning, that's what I'm looking for. And I don't mind a day when there's a big storm coming. If you can burn ahead of a big storm, I think that's great. But really you want the surrounding fuels to be just damp enough that a fire won't spread through them. Rodney, you guys the same way?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes a stormy day is a good day. Fire needs oxygen to burn. So if you have a good strong wind, it can blow that fire through the pile. And, even if you put plastic on it, the outside edges are still wet. They're still hard to burn. If the pile is built in a compact way, getting air through that pile is tough. On a stormy day, a good brisk wind can help you quite a bit.
And I just realized we put this slide together with a weather forecast that's not ideal. And so this weather forecast would be one that I would not burn on. Probably goes with the previous slide, but this looks at humidity of 18% and wind of 16 miles an hour. And so that's the kind of conditions that's going to spread your pile to the surrounding unit and beyond. So that's what you want to look out for and not burn on those kind of conditions. Okay, go ahead, Julie. Thanks.
Okay, so we've selected a location to build our pile. We've built the pile, got it covered. It's seasoned. Now it's time to burn. So a few things we can use to burn. If you don't have a lot of piles and you can sit there and kind of nurse it, using just firewood and paper. You can grab kindling from around the pile, add some paper to it. You can get the pile to go that way. It's obviously going to be a little bit time consuming, but it will work. That picture shows some fire starter gel packs. We've used those before. You can take 3 or 4 or 5, put those in the middle of the pile as far in as you can reach. Those will work. Propane torch or the weed burner. That's kind of a common thing that a lot of more country or rural neighbors have, and those can be pretty good. Stick that propane wand in that pile. You can get things going pretty easily that way. A drip torch in Panama. So drip torch, you've probably seen those. There's a picture there. That's just using a mixture of gasoline and diesel, about a 2/3 mix of diesel to 1/3 gasoline. Using that particular drip torch is a very effective way, fairly safe, to get the pile to go. The Panama torch uses the same fuel mixture. It's that red can on the right, but it's pressurized as a little hand pump, it's like a little weed sprayer, but it's all metal, so it won't melt and it can withstand the pressure. You just pump it up, and then you get a little jet of that fuel mixture, and you can get usually maybe 5-6 feet, kind of a flamethrower type effect into the middle of the pile. And those are kind of the safest ways we can burn. There are some other ways that go above this presentation. Whenever you do burn, though, you want to have your firefighting equipment with you. If it's not raining, you're going to get little fire starts on the rotten stumps adjacent to it, the large woody debris, the old duffy material will probably catch an ember and start to smoke. If you're okay with it, you can let it smolder, but a lot of times you have to put it out. So having a water can, hazel hose, shovel are good things to have around to just kind of give you something to work with if you start spreading embers where you don't want them. Also, not picture listed flares, fusees work well for lighting piles. And, you know, I have a Duraflame log in that picture as well. We put the blower in there. Like I said before, a lot of these piles, they just need some air. Just as you would with bellows on a campfire, having a blower there can help with the burning process.
Okay, monitoring. So, you know, the first thing to say is as a landowner, you are responsible for the fire you light. And so, you know, how that plays out in the different jurisdictions around the state varies, but I think at a very fundamental level, if you light the fire, recognize that you're the one responsible for it. And, you know, for, you know, the piles that I've seen, well-constructed piles, those will often burn for a week or more if you've done a good job of constructing it. And then those that are what I would say poorly constructed, they have a lot of dirt in them, they have stumps and large pieces, those are going to burn for months, or they can. And so, you know, you can really do yourself a lot of favors in how you construct and burn the pile. And then when it goes out, you can feel confident about it. And then, or you can have it be a kind of a difficult problem for you for months and months. What you want to do is go back and check it. So, you know, if you live right there, that's great. You can burn the pile and then every day go look at it. And if the weather changes, you can be out there monitoring the whole time. If you don't live on site and, you know, you're a landowner that has to go travel to it, then this is even more important. And so I guess what I would say is that if you can burn it on mineral soil, like Rodney said, and keep those big chunks out, then it'll burn down looking like this one. And then your checking is a lot easier. You can use a shovel to wade in there and scooch the ashes aside and make sure that it's dead out to the bottom, which is really what you have to do. You can't just drive by. You're going to have to get out and take your shovel and scrape it apart and look in there at that ash and make sure it's out. And then if the weather changes and turns hot and dry, then you really want to monitor it. And if it is starting to spark up, you have a chance to put some water on it and hold it down until the weather event passes. So, and documentation, I think it's always a good idea to if you go out and monitor it, put that in your notes. And then if something were to happen, or if someone were to relight a pile for you, maybe you only burned 5 out of the 10, and then a member of our public was out fooling around on a night and they've lit the 6th one for you. If you've got a good paper trail showing what your experience has been and you've been doing your due diligence, that's just helpful in the back end. So we'd really encourage you to just keep track of what you've done and when and why, and that'll help you down the road. So. Okay, we have some examples after this to talk about, but I would just say you can get more information. We already mentioned this, this publication that we put together with those groups, and those are available for you. I think also the people that helped put this together are resources. So a lot of times, like, you know, Associated Oregon Loggers help put this together. They're operators. You can ask the logger about what they think. Keep Oregon Green has good material. OSU Extension, your stewardship forester. There's a lot of resources out there for you. So. Okay, let's look at a few examples. Okay, here's one. This is on state forest ground, one that we burned this last fall. So this is on a landing of a clear cut piled with a log loader. Nothing, you know, nothing super wrong with this pile. I think they did a nice job. It's kind of the classic. If you say to the logger, hey, we really want you to pile the unit when you're done, and they say yes, then this is what you'll get. And so they've piled this with the log loader. And if you look at the ground around the pile, it's not been scraped clean. There's quite a bit of debris left. And it's piled right on the edge of the landing. And so the next picture will kind of show after burn. So here's kind of the problem with that, is that they piled it right on the edge. Oh, one thing to note in the background there, you can see is they separate out the large material for firewood. And so we sell firewood permits, and a lot of people have good ways to get rid of firewood. And so they did separate out all the large material that didn't go as pulp for whatever reason into firewood. There's short ends and defective pieces. But by piling it right on the edge of the landing, and that edge is full of dirt and bark that was, run over as part of the yarding process. And so there's this crust of 12 to 36-inch deep bark and mud and now burned log ends. Not a huge problem in itself. We burned this in the fall, and it's out in the middle of our ownership. And so it smoldered for weeks and weeks, and we did not get a big change in the weather. We burned it pretty late, and so it didn't cause any problems for us. But this is the kind of thing that will happen if you don't put it on that clean mineral soil. And if the weather had changed, we might have felt like we had to go put that out. And if we had neighbors right nearby who would be uncomfortable with that and didn't want to smell a little bit of residual smoke every time things dried out, they would probably want you to put that out as well. So Rodney, any thoughts about when you see those two pictures?
There's just a lot of unburned fuel all around there, and a lot of heat that's just going to sit there and smolder for a long time, waiting for that east windy vent to blow all the ash off, give the embers fresh oxygen. Then they start throwing embers, and that pile may not burn, but those embers in that east windy vent are going to launch their way, 100, 200 feet down the hill, or whichever direction west is. And they'll find themselves a nice dry log, and you'll start spotting, and just problematic.
Yep, exactly. And I think we could have, if we had got ahead of that, we could have piled that debris in the middle of the landing where it's on a solid rock surface, and then when we burned it, it would burn until it went out, and we wouldn't have caused that problem for ourselves.
Right.
Okay, so I put this picture in there just around timing to look at that crow's nest that's left around the edge. And so I think it was a good pile, good fine material. I think it would have burned completely with a little bit better timing on the burn. And so there's this trade-off between burning early and where you get a complete burn, and burning late when you have less risk of fire spread, but you get a more complete job. And so I don't blame this landowner. I think, I did not live on the site. They had a number of piles across the area, so it wasn't their only one, and difficult to get water to it. It was out in the middle of the unit, so it was done for reforestation purposes, but it did leave a big crow's nest. And so that's just, I think, a set of trade-offs for you to think about when you're trying to burn. If you can go earlier, you can get that more complete job. And plastic help too.
The other thing to look at this pile, so every pile, it's going to create that donut. You want to have the vertical, your sides, you want those to be as vertical as possible. You'll always get those little trailings. And so, once those trailings get to be 2 or 3 feet thick, they're not going to burn. All the heat from the fire, the radiant heat, convective heat is going up in the air. It's not, you have to have a stiff wind to get the heat down and pre-dry that stuff that's 2 or 3 feet out of the ground. So avoid those trailings, get them up on top of the pile. That's, a lot of times what our pilers will do, loggers, they'll take a good strong log and jam it vertically in the ground. And then they'll use that to pile up against. That gives you a nice vertical wall you can burn up against. It gives you a dry spot as well. Kind of more advanced technique, but it works really well and minimizes the edges there.
If this is in your, if you have a tractor, you also, as it's starting to burn down, you go shove that stuff in. Probably a lot of people do that as well. That'll help you get rid of it too. So. Okay, so I really appreciate this photo. So on state forest, we have a lot of public use. And so pretty classic is we'll have the loggers pile the slash and we'll burn the slash, but then that landing still has a lot of bark and debris and the small stuff that we didn't get piled. And we have a lot of fire starts there from the public that is stopping there to recreate. And we also have that on private land, especially where we have public access. So, there's probably been, in my 9 years here in Forest Grove, 9 or 10 significant fires caused by the public stopping on private land to your landings and, doing whatever it is the public do. They're target shooting, they're barbecuing, they're got a warming fire, they're smoking. And so if you have one of those party spots, one of those places that has a good view or good public access, what we did here is take an excavator, first we burned the pile, and then we had the excavator come back in afterwards and scrape everything remaining off to the side. And so some of that they threw down low, just took it and chucked it off the landing, kind of far enough down that no one would walk down there easily. And another part of it, they took and put a little wildlife pile out of the way in a place that people are not likely to use. But what they essentially did is create a fire safe area. So if we do have the public there recreating, it won't be very unlikely to cause a fire. And really recommend people think about doing this kind of treatment. This took so we did this in a couple landings, and anywhere from 5 hours of machine time to 13 hours. And the 13 hours was a pretty extreme, there's a lot of material to move. So really you're talking about 4 or 5 hours of machine time to do some post-burn cleanup if you have a machine available. The other thing you can do if you have, like last September, if you have a known party spot on those days that are really critical, is you just go out there and make sure no one is messing around. And that's another way to do it is you may not be able to do this job, but you certainly can be out there during that, if it's a Friday night when there's a real dry east wind event, you can be out there on Friday night and make sure that no one's there. So, but I would encourage you to think about public use and who's using your site if you don't live there. Oh yeah, so I think we showed a pile a little while ago at the very beginning that was a unit pile that looked really good and was kind of a textbook in unit pile. This is a landing pile. I think it's pretty good, Rodney. I'm not sure if it's textbook or not. It was done when it was a little bit wet. So there's maybe a little bit of compaction around the pile where they sat and worked it. But they do have a dirt ring around the pile. And it's mostly all the small stuff. So the big chunks have been thrown off the side. But like Rodney was saying, the pulp, it's all the tops, it's all the big pieces that came up to the landing. So what do you think there, Rodney?
Well, I think it's a pretty good pile. It looks like you can see some fines in the middle there, large woody debris on the outside. Looks like things are stacked about as good as the machine could do. I'd be curious to see what this area looked like, but I bet that pile burned pretty efficiently.
And so landing piles will often look more like that.
Right. This was a good day.
Go ahead, Rodney. This one's yours, I think.
Yeah. So, for us on a good day, we will burn, well, we have 3 tree farms, and, we could really light 400 piles a day. We'll bring crews and just go across, really maximize what smoke management will allow us to burn. This is one unit, looks like a lot of landing piles, yarder landing piles. You look, it's obviously not raining. It's a good day. Just looking at the smoke, looks like we have good unstable air, so it's going to mix well. The way the smoke is laid over, looks like there's a good wind out there to fan the fires. So it's kind of what we're looking at. Looking at the flame lengths, the flames are going away from the reprod. So sometimes we will look at that, have the wind blow the fire away from our protected resource. And I think, this picture might show that. Overall, it was a good day. Yeah. One more thing, with this, most of our roads have one way in, one way out. So that the pile here in the foreground, you probably can't drive your vehicle past that. So you want to go to the end of the road and work your way out, if at all possible. Also what will happen sometimes is the smoke will blow across the road and you just physically can't see the road. even with your head outside looking straight down. Those are bad days. You want to minimize those. So think about what's going to happen when you light 3, 4, 10 of these piles along the road. Work your way out and burn with a buddy. Okay, so this fire here was, I think, during the east wind event. You just tell by the fire, everything is aglow. It's getting a lot of wind on it. That was not a good night. Ideally, we would not be out there at night to take a picture of a pile.
Okay, this one's mine, Rodney. So this, this is a spot. It has public access. It's not a paved road, but it's not gated. And so this was a place where the piles were not burned as part of the harvest operation. So they stayed there. And then, and actually, I think the previous picture was this spot during the nighttime. And so, overnight, our crews built fire trail. You can see the fire line there around holding the fire in check. But you can see there on the hillside by the next day, the piles are still burning hard. And so, very hard to extinguish days later. And so this is sort of a plug for, if you have piles, especially with public access, but if you have piles, burn them when you can control it instead of waiting for it to happen years later. And then also to sort of illustrate how long they burn for. And so this is, 24 hours later and they're still burning.
And, piles like that, you can see the hand crew there just downhill the smoke. But those type of piles really require an excavator to dig it up and thousands of gallons of water. In a lot of ways, those piles are not, all you can do is control it and wait till the next rain event.
Yeah. Yep, let them burn down. Okay, Julie, I think that might have been the last picture. Before we go to the advertising of the next good shows, sort of just to reiterate some of the best management practices. And I think one of the key ones is when you first start out is decide what you want to do and make sure you can do it and work with your logger so there's no confusion about what's going to happen at the end of the harvest. So that's sort of, key number one. And then key number two might be this where you locate your pile and make sure that it meets all those different things that Rodney talked about. And so it's built in the right place or all of them are built in the right places if you have more than one. And really encourage you to put plastic in the pile as you're building it, if you can pull that off. And if you really can't, then put it on afterwards. So it's ready to burn. And then when you're ready to burn it, work with the local jurisdiction, whether it's the Department of Forestry or whether it's your fire department, to make sure you follow all the regulations. And if it's Forestry department, hopefully we help you through that. That's our job. We'll help you through that process. So you're all ready to do it. And then you can feel confident about lighting it. And then if you've done everything right, it should burn down and go out relatively quickly and cause you very little monitoring. However, you do want to make certain it's out, digging through the ashes and checking it. And then, I think that was it. Then you'd be done. And if you do have to go back in with an east wind event and monitor it, please do that. And you can always call us for help. Rodney, any other summary points you want to make sure we hit there?
Mike kind of hit on it. Try and plan ahead. So if you do have an issue, who will you call? Do you have a friend with a machine, with a 300-gallon tank of water? Just have an avenue. Because chances are, what's going to happen is if there's an east wind event, everybody has the east wind event, and so just like last September, the whole Northwest or whole state's on fire. The same thing would happen here. So ODF is available, but they're going to be practicing triage, and they may not be able to come to you. Your rural fire protection districts, again, they're going to be looking to protect resources. So, in those events, you kind of have to be prepared to weather the storm, so to speak.
Well, thanks, Mike and Rodney. That was a great presentation, a lot of good information. We have questions coming in. One that came up, just wanted to get in here too. If a landowner is hesitant to burn, is it standard to them to maybe ask the logger or reforestation, contractor to assist? And maybe what are things they consider then, like the contracts or anything that you might address to that?
Mike, do you want to take it or me too?
Yeah, I was actually reading the questions. I didn't see that. Question is, can you ask the logger to help you burn? Is that what it was there, Julie?
Yeah, so given the liability, or people, this may be something of especially a family forest landowner doesn't do this on a regular basis and is pretty hesitant. Yeah. Is it something standard that maybe they could work with their logger or a reforestation contractor? Are there's contractors available to maybe help them burn? And then what would they consider? We talked about contract examples or things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's I think that's a great question. I think it's a challenge. Some loggers will burn for their landowners. I don't think most of them like to, because it's a headache, right? The timing is uncertain. They have to monitor it. Then there's this question about who's liable for it. So that's a very upfront question to have with the logger. Maybe as part of the contract negotiation when they're trying to get the job, is get that locked in. Now, if that fails, then you can hire someone to do it for you. And it might be a consulting forester rather than reforestation crew that you might turn to. I don't know, Rodney, do you have any thoughts about that?
Depending on how big your harvest unit is, you're gonna probably have a reforestation crew coming to plant your trees. Most of those type of labor crews are very efficient at burning piles. So a little bit of pre-planting, you're gonna be able to easily get the logger to do it. The logger can get somebody to do it. Or you work with your consultant to get the reforestation contractor to do it. I think that's a pretty easy ask.
Great. So our first question from Terry, when can it be better to leave limbs and things scattered and just plant into them? So when might that be a better scenario?
So that's just going to be, as you walk through it, think about trying to get a tree every, 10 to 11 feet. In order to get, our goal is 400 trees per acre. So you're planting a 10 by 11 grid. You have to be able to see dirt, or the planter has to be able to use a shovel to move the slash to get to the dirt. At $1 a tree, 50 cents to plant, 50 cents to grow it, you want to be able to have a pretty good home for that tree to go into. And if you're forcing your planters to plant into a difficult spot, you could have a lot of mortality out there. So
I think most of the time the landing is it feels like right around the landing, it ends up being the most problematic area.
Correct.
And so having them pile and burn the debris in the half acre around the landing, almost always have to do that, always have to manage the slash there in some way. So out across the unit, most of the time, at least in the Forest Grove area, you can plant through that.
Right. Coastal places, some units just produce a lot of slash, and you can have the logger move it around with their tongs, their heel rack. But that's the thing, you just need to be able to reforest it, and each unit's going to be a little bit different.
That might be the scenario too, where you guys were talking about to make sure you can burn before you start the harvest. So really to make sure you're in one of those places where you can have, burn those slash might be, again, when you might have to think of a different plan.
Right. With that, you don't want to go through the effort of building these beautiful big burn piles and then find out you can't burn, because then you've created an eyesore that's literally going to be there for 10, 15 years until the surrounding trees grow up and shield it. So anyway, yeah, prior planning.
So Mark asked, has anyone looked at the economics of chipping on site versus burning?
So Stimson has done that a lot. We have been bit by the east wind bug a lot. So we've kind of opened up and gone out to look for chipping. You can chip, you can chunk, any ways to get rid of biomass, but biomass is plentiful out there. It's expensive, or it's expensive to deal with it. You have to haul it away. It's very inexpensive. A lot of times we have to pay the logger to get rid of it, and we pay a lot of money to do that. Could be $300 an acre to haul chips away. And at that rate, you have to have something pretty important to offset that cost. So it can be done. The companies that do it on a regular basis, but they have downwind neighbors who they absolutely cannot affect.
Yeah, so if you're in a tight neighborhood and you don't want to create the smoke, I think that's a good option. Just recognize that, like Rodney said, $300 an acre, but I'm going to guess that's kind of the bulk rate. So and of course it goes up and down with the prices of pulp material. So yeah, if you have a 20-acre parcel surrounded by homes, you're probably going to pay, more than $300 an acre.
Right.
But it's a very viable option and preferable in many places if you can afford it.
And then our question from Rob is, do you recommend any good sources for the plastic to cover piles that you talked about? Any places that you often source that out from?
So nearly every hardware store will have a roll of plastic. Home Depot, Lowe's, Lumberman's, Ace Hardware. We source ours from Par Lumber. We'll buy it pallets at a time. You kind of want to go, I think 3 millimeter plastic will work. 4 is probably a little bit better. Will withstand the wind. Just don't do garbage bags. Garbage bags could work in the right situation, but they might just be too thin and rip in the wind and really not buy anything.
And I've used our family tarps and then pulled them off afterwards too. So
right,
if you're just dealing with one pile, you've got lots of options.
Yes.
Thanks. So I'm going to take a minute and launch the poll. So appreciate everyone that stuck with us through the questions. Appreciate everyone joining us today. We'll continue answering questions if you want to keep putting them into that Q&A button. Right now, I'm going to launch a poll about just the presentation. If you'll just answer a couple questions for us, we appreciate that. We also want to mention, hopefully you've seen this up here, the next webinar will be on Tuesday, May 18th, is Managing Your Forest with Fire in Mind. It's part 2. You're welcome to go back to the Tree School Online. The part 1 was with Brad Robinson and Glenn Ahrens and others talking about more of the silviculture part of Managing Your Forest with Fire in Mind, but that is available to watch the part 1. John Bailey will join us for part 2 on Tuesday, May 18th. You're welcome to register for that. And then hopefully you've also heard about OSU Extension the fire program has been offering Wildfire Wednesdays. And so that's Fire on the Land is the next one coming up on May 19th. They're at noon. And so I'd encourage you to go on their website and take a look at those different programs they have coming up. Helpful. There's been some already occur. There's some recordings. There's a few more to go. A lot of great information. I know I joined last week to talk about how to be prepared, know what to pack and how to go. So a lot of great information about fire. This is National Fire or Preparedness Month. So May's a good time for us to start talking about it as we are heading into fire season. So I'll leave that pull up for another minute or so while we answer another question. So Ronnie and Mike, someone asked, could you talk about liability and insurance for slash fires that get away? The landowner has ultimate liability for fires they light if they get away. Limits of liability are $300,000 if the landowner obeyed all the rules. I believe the insurance available to cover this for members, maybe by Oregon Small Woodlands Association. So sounds like they ask questions and then are trying to maybe confer information that they received.
Yeah, so this is a tough one. First of all, that liability policy or that limited liability, if you have a forest operation and you follow all the rules, then there is a cap on your fire suppression cost of $300,000. So, if you're doing an operation, you have all your fire equipment, that's kind of how that applies. Now, when you're burning slash, I'm not sure, I think there's some gray there. For one thing, your burn permit undoubtedly says monitor it and keep it from spreading. So if you light your slash pile and it spreads, then almost by definition, you've not followed the burn permit. And how that's going to be viewed, I said, take notes and, keep track of what you've done. And that's partly why I say that, is that it might be very circumstantial about whether you're assigned the liability for that fire or not, because almost undoubtedly you're outside your burn permit by letting it spread. So I don't want to say there's any hard and fast rules there. I think you might very well be liable for the fire suppression costs. And the second thing to say about that is the $300,000 is only your fire suppression costs. If it burns up your neighbor's timber, hopefully unlikely, right? In November, it wouldn't do that. But if it were to, that's all between landowners, and there's no cap on that liability. I always recommend that small woodland insurance, but I just don't want to promise it always applies. So is that a complicated enough answer?
Tough question. But I think Mike's right with that. Bottom line, we can live with slash on the landscape. It's a preventative type activity. We don't want to write a check for $10,000 to somebody, $20,000. That's just a lot of money. We don't want to do it. It's a lot of headache. It puts people at risk to fight the fire. So do everything you can to avoid putting yourself in that situation.
Boy, this is an interesting question. Suggestions for slash generated from removal of maple trees in a Douglas fir forest. They harvested 5 years later. So you probably take maple out and have some maple debris. Is probably pretty thick. Maybe that's kind of what you're thinking about. It's going to break down over 5 years, though. 5 years of decay. And then you're going to harvest Douglas fir out of it. It may break down a lot. You may not have to do too much.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that situation, especially if it's a shovel. If it's a ground-based operation, machine's going to be able to walk over that, crush it up. It's, maple rots pretty quick, within a couple of years. I wouldn't really worry too much about it, especially if it's small stuff. If it's old maple that's, really big and, we tip it over, it's still 60 feet in the air. That could be a different story, but if it's just basic, I call it kind of sapling type maple, pole maple. I think you do pretty well just letting it rot from above, or
right,
just kind of melt away.
Big defective maple trunks, those are great wildlife habitat. Jumble 4 or 5 of those together in a pile, and put a couple of shovelfuls of slash over the top, and that'd be a great place to have bobcats and coyotes hanging out to eat all your other pests. So you might think about that. Now, if those maple sprouts, stumps are sprouting like crazy and they're going to have a 5-year head start over your Douglas fir, then you probably have to control the sprouts. So if you want to have Douglas fir forest back.
Well, that sounds
yeah,
like a good problem solving. Sometimes thinking about creation of wildlife biodins and different things when you have that type of material. And so we'll see if any further questions come in here as we wrap up. But just again, want to thank Rodney and Mike for your time today. We also mentioned again, we have the pamphlet. We also have a how-to instructional video that's coming out on slash piling, and then we'll have this webinar. So a lot of good resources on slash piling, if something that you can go back and refer to later as well. Thank you to Norma for helping with behind the scenes today and helping us monitor chat. And I really appreciate everybody joining us. If you need those continuing education credits, please also go online and the forms are there. So it doesn't look like we have any further questions coming in. We again appreciate Mike and Ronnie, your time today. Any last closing thoughts as we roll out of here?
No, thank you for attending.
Yep. Thanks everybody for attending. It been great to see people's faces. I know there's some friends out there, so have a great afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks you guys. Thanks both of you again for sharing all your expertise. We really appreciate it. And wish everybody a good afternoon and good luck with any future endeavors with slash piling and burning. And again, consult those resources that are available in your area and the Department of Forestry and those stewardship foresters. And there's a lot of technical information that's available. So appreciate everybody for coming, and we'll hope people join us next time for the next session on fire. Thank you.